Welcome back to another of our bridging videos, our third bridging video. We have just finished Deuteronomy. We were at the end of that book last time we were in groups, and we're about to get into 2 Samuel. A lot has happened in between, so I'm going to give you the highlights and try and bridge the gap between those 2 studies. Where are we at in God's rescue project? You'll remember that God announced that incredible rescue mission that he completely committed himself to when he spoke to Abraham back in Genesis. He said, I'm going to be your God. He said, you're going to be my people, and through you all the nations will be blessed. I'll give you a land and I will bless you. Well, there are lots of people now, lots of Israelites, but if you remember in our last study, last week, we were on the edge of the land. God is with his people, so I guess that's another tick in the rescue project. God has come to dwell with his people, which is wonderful. But they don't yet have the land. In between Deuteronomy and 2 Samuel 7, we see Israel in the land. They get in at the start of the book of Joshua. And Joshua is, in summary, a very positive book. We see them gradually getting the land and beginning to enjoy the land, and the book of Joshua ends with them enjoying rest from their enemies. It really does seem now as though they might be in the perfect place with their God dwelling with them, and they've had a very good leader to help them, who God has worked through. They've had Joshua. Pretty positive. Judges, the next book, is a slightly different story. Really, the book of Judges is a broken record. On repeat, God's people go down, a generation rises up that forget the Lord and all the incredible rescue work that he has done, all the wonderful ways he's been working to bless his people. They forget him, they go down. God gives them up to the hands of their enemies. They cry out for deliverance, and they come back up because God raises up a little saviour, a judge, to help them. Then again, they forget the Lord. They go down, and things are terrible, and God gives them into the hands of their enemies, and then God raises up another judge as they cry out to God for deliverance. It's a broken record, up and down, up and down, up and down. My hand's broken because it's different to what I'm saying. And actually, as you go through the book, it's not only down and then up as they cry for deliverance and God's gracious, down and then up as they cry for deliverance and God's gracious. It's a gradual spiral of getting worse and worse and worse. So that by the end of the book of Judges, well, it's absolute chaos in the land. God's people are forgetting God, and they're turning against one another, and there's chaos and there's carnage. The last words of the book of Judges are that there is no king in the land, no good ruler, and so people are doing what is right in their own eyes. And that makes us think, well, surely Judges has us crying out for a good leader, not just a good leader, but a good king. People are left to themselves, it's absolute chaos. But if we can find a king who everyone can trust, who will serve the Lord, that's going to be much better for everyone. I guess a king who's a little bit like Joshua, the good leader. And so when we hear in 1 Samuel that God's people are now asking for a king, initially we think that's really good news. Back in Deuteronomy, we heard that the scepter would not depart from Judah. We're expecting a king to come on the scene soon. We heard that they would ask for a king, and God had plans about that. A king's going to come on the scene soon. We heard, if you remember actually, back in the promises to Abraham, part of God's rescue package, his rescue project, that kings would come from God's people. It's part of the plan. So we're thinking this is good news. But unfortunately, the people asked for a king in the wrong way. They want a king so that they can be like all the other nations. All the other nations are going for monarchy now, so they want that too. And that's okay. But they ask for a king to fight their battles for them. And they ask and they want in the end a king who the most recent and final judge, Samuel, will tell them will take and take and take. In other words, their king project is a movement away from God's rescue project, because they're wanting to trust in man instead of trusting in God as their king. Asking for a king is great, so long as we're asking for a king who trusts first in God so that we can be helped and looked after. But asking for a king to ask for man to replace God, that is totally wrong. And that is the way that these guys are asking. And so the king they get is the king they ask for. In fact, the king is Saul, and Saul means asked for, and he's a nightmare. He disobeys the Lord and things go terribly wrong. And then once again, God comes through and is gracious and generous and kind, and he chooses the king that he wants to be in charge. He chooses David, a man after God's own heart. And that is where we're up to when we get to 2 Samuel 7. God is dwelling with his people. His people, after the end of Deuteronomy, are now in the land. They have it, and that's good news. His people are continuing to trust in themselves, and that's bad news. But God very kindly redeems, if you like, their king project and makes it good. He puts a good king in place of Saul, and we now have David ruling on the throne. A kingdom is starting to form in the land of promise. And as we get to 2 Samuel 7, we'll see just what God has next to say about that kingdom and how it will work in his plans to save the world.